Okay, I guess we're live now. So, hi everybody to I guess maybe the seventh or so episode of Code Talk Teach, our tech talk show here at Oasis Digital. I am Kyle Cordes, one of the regulars on here, and this is Paul. Go ahead, introduce yourself, Paul.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you again. Also got with us today, we got a special guest, Drew Weems, also from Oasis. Welcome, Drew.
Yeah, I'm a developer also at Oasis with some experience, as much as several of the other team members with Cypress and other E2E tools.
Great. So our big topic today is we're going to talk about Cypress and Protractor and kind of the past, present, and future of E2E testing, mostly in an Angular context, but maybe even a little more broadly. Typically, though, before we jump into our main topic, spend a few minutes just kind of, what's going on this week, kind of, I guess, in the tech Twitters and in the general development world. So, what's hot this week, Paul? Are NFTs still hot, or am I behind the curve on that? Is that past?
I don't know. I think I saw a news article that was talking about Ethereum starting to catch up with Bitcoin in terms of, I think it's viability. So,
I mean, I know that
still worth watching.
Like I know that I see the word Bitcoin on the news a lot more often than the other things. So I if that's the metric, Bitcoin is still winning. Anything else? What's going on in our tech world? In Angular land, stability. Yeah.
Stability's the hotness right now.
I mean, everything I use at the moment kind of works, and that makes me nervous. Drew, you have anything?
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. I'm not. I haven't been seeing big, changes coming about E2E, but I guess there's just this long-running, debate about whether, what should be the default tool that comes with Angular.
Yeah, we'll get to our advertised topic. We got a few other things. We try to talk about other news of the week just to give people time to make it in the thing here.
Well, to his point though, it's like the Protractor thing that we're going to talk about isn't the only thing. Like right now, like that stability is being coupled with like a reevaluation of all the choices. So ESLint, for example, there's a lot of brouhaha over the fact that they're not shipping a linting tool in the box as well.
So, I mean, I love having a cohesive tool set in the box, but yeah, it's especially with like ESLint. And I don't think we're ruffling any feathers to say ESLint is a fine and great tool, but it's not super fast. And when you have a very large volume of code, you notice that it's not super fast.
Well, it's also not feature parity complete.
Yeah. Did the CodeLyzer stuff ever make it over? Is that stuff, or is that kind of left behind?
That was deprecated with the switch.
Yeah, I know that CodeLyzer stuff was deprecated, but like, did any of that functionality make it into something ESLint based, or are we kind of without that functionality for now?
As far as I'm aware, it's done.
Yeah. I mean, I one of my broader frustrations with really all the tools in our world here is when old things kind of go away, but the new thing is not really a replacement. That's kind of an ongoing frustration. And I guess it's impossible to ask anyone, hey, don't ever upgrade until you have full feature parity, because it may never happen. But
yeah, with regards to the ESLint thing, I kind of dug into it a little bit back when the change came to NX to support ESLint.
Yeah.
It seemed like ESLint actually has like a fair bit of overhead to get going. So like once it gets going, it's fast, and that's why like VS Code, you're able to get helpful tips really quickly because it keeps the ESLint daemon running or something like that. And when you have, it's not clear to me exactly what the bottleneck is with like NX, whether it's because it has to start up ESLint for each project and each library, or if it's even on a per file basis. I don't know exactly what the implementation is in NX, but it seems like there's a lot of opportunity for that to be optimized. So hopefully, yeah. Go ahead.
It sounds like a really good hope then that the tooling may get rewired a bit and optimized, and we may eventually get pretty close to the performance we were happy with before. That's good.
That's the hope, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that when you just kind of do the default thing and run it separately on a bunch of projects, that's the case where it's just not fast. So here's another one, kind of more broadly in the web dev world. It seems like there's kind of a consolidation to and we've been kind of wondering for years, what's the next wave of web dev tools? And I think we're actually seeing now. I think the next wave are tools that are very fast, right? So I think all the candidates for the next wave are either have or are in the process of adopting these new, more native-based bundling or dev tools that just go much faster than using Webpack. Secondly, convention-based routing. There's a whole bunch of these things. There's Next and Nuxt and 3 different ones for Svelte and 6 others that I could research if I had a few minutes to write them down. But convention-based routing seems to be winning for the next round. And I know there's some folks out that are vehemently opposed to convention-based routing. I'm kind of neutral, but it seems like it's winning. Default SSR seems to be winning. Now we're getting an SSR capability in the box with Angular, which is great. Really great to see that. I've been all the way around the block with Universal and with Scully. But having something in the box is great. But having something added on in the box is not quite the same as having it be the default way of working. I think a super fast dev cycle characterizes most of the kind of next gen that seems to be emerging. So I'm really happy to see that there finally is some, I don't know if consensus is the word, but there's some next wave of tools that all seem to be pointing the same direction as they kind of were in the current generation when it started. I hope that we see Angular kind of keep up with that. I know that it's not quite on their I guess what do they call it, their roadmap yet, because there's some challenges to go to kind of the newer generation of tools behind the scenes. But I hope I hope Angular eventually ends up kind of in the same really super robust enterprisey position in the next wave as it has been.
While we're kind of thinking about the future, another thing that I'm noticing is there's we're kind of at the tail end of discovery on the Angular life cycle. What we're going to discover about Angular as developers of apps on that platform, and we kind of got it all figured out now. Plenty of folks are now deployed and in production, but there's now continued tension in the long run about the support of their Angular applications, for the purposes of dev pipelines, deployment pipelines, E2E testing support, internationalization, localization, being able to spin up multiple copies of it. And we've had really great, really robust long-term native tools for things like their servers in those environments. It's if you think about someone who's got a really advanced set of Kubernetes clusters and they're trying to spin up a bunch of microservices and micro front ends, they've got really well integrated, really polished tools for their backends with great change control that deeply integrates all the way down to the code level of understanding things that change. But then they get back into the web world, and we still have that almost that second-rate citizen kind of world with web tools, where even though we now have things like Inex and we've got things like Protractor and Cypress, and we have tools that can do the job, they're just kind of on a different axis, a different granularity than these tools that are meant to work on your entire workspace, but that entire workspace is assumed to be something like a .NET platform.
Yeah.
So now we have this disconnect with Azure, for example, and all of the tooling and support it has for all of these things natively for the server side, but that web is almost like an afterthought. And so I'm thinking that some of these tools may go in the direction of, yes, fast, like you mentioned, but I think we might see more of an uptick in support for web as a first-class citizen in that environment also. Blazor was one example of that, how everything you do in Blazor is just an extension of the .NET world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been sort of the strength and weakness of the sort of kind of parallel universe of Microsoft environment tools, that they are kind of more integrated in the box than the non-Microsoft world. But on the other hand, they kind of assume that you're using a broader part of the box. And so if you like picking up and grabbing Blazor and using it in the middle of a project that isn't really in any sense like a Microsoft environment project, I think is technically possible now, but it still feels pretty weird.
Yeah, and I was using Microsoft as an example there, but I noticed this pattern kind of regardless of what the broader like parent tool set is of an organization in all of those situations, whether they're kind of rolling their own Java servers or .NET servers or even Node servers, like connecting the management of the server-side code. And for whatever reason, server-side code seems to be driving the environment for those build tool chains, and then web is kind of tacked on as an afterthought. And I'd like to see those come closer together still.
Well, Paul, I feel like you and I have been having this conversation about every month for about the last 3 or 4 years about how like the high productivity future has to be kind of a merging of the layers and tools, frameworks, libraries, etc., that cross the layers, so that we get away from handcrafting a server, handcrafting a client, and handcrafting the API they use to talk, but rather like writing a program which is like automatically extended across the network, but in an efficient way.
Yeah, that would be a huge improvement over the current state of things, to be able to do things with the full stack more automatically. Because I'm thinking of it right now from like the data side, where you have to like copy things like so much and re-implement the same thing over and over. It's not dry at all when you're creating a RESTful API, for example, because you have to implement it on the back end and then almost re-implement it on the front end.
Absolutely. And you never get it exactly right. I think there's a big wave coming. At some point, we're going to see decision makers, and by decision makers, I mean people responsible for budgets, are going to slowly and then all at once grasp the importance of this trend. And I think we'll see a big shift where all of a sudden it's going to be, how are you going to cost justify using a tool where you write the client and server separately and craft API separately, when this team over here is using a tool where they don't do that and they're delivering at 30% less cost? I think that kind of trend is heading our way. Although, of course, like all trends, predicting how long it'll take is basically impossible.
Yeah, and the front end world, kind of like what Paul was saying earlier too, it like has its own, ecosystem around package.json and all the libraries, and as long as you're doing everything in that world, everything's really awesome. Like Node.js paired with your front-end web application, and tools like NX. But then when you're spanning across to the back end as well, that's where there's just this impedance mismatch almost between the two sets of the two ecosystems, because you have to like build your own way to containerize and your application and share interfaces for your APIs. If there's like a more automatic way to do that.
Well, whenever that kind of problem's going to say, and for anyone who's working on that, we do offer services and training around Bazel. So, okay, so I guess one more kind of off-topic topic that most of us have been tracking to some extent is, are we seeing any murmurs yet of when in-person tech events may resume? I miss people.
Don't know about tech events, but there are both instructors at Oasis Digital as well as clients coming to us for instruction that are both starting to ask questions about the feasibility and timeline of showing up in person. So business side of things.
Yeah, I think private stuff on the business side is going to be ramping up quite soon here.
Well, that's obviously going to be a precursor to the public events.
Yeah.
I guess you're not going to send your developer to public event.
We can I guess we can brag slightly that in our exciting new development center, which went in a year ago and has been in partial disuse because of all this. We actually have an on-site vaccination event coming up, so we very convenient. I guess that puts us in the elite among companies where you don't even have to walk out in the rain to get the job done. Anyway, Paul, absolutely. I think that there's certainly already a lot of interest coming back on private things, but like that's not the stuff we all miss, right? We miss like big things. I want me some ng-conf, Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I haven't seen anything real concrete, but I've seen a lot of just increasing discussion on the onlines about, hey, anybody have any events coming up? It's gonna be feasible here real soon. Well, I guess we should jump into our big topic of the day, which is kind of the past, present, especially future of end-to-end web testing on we're kind of a little bit Angular centric on this topic because that's where we've done the most of it. We've also done some of it outside Angular, and some we're likely to spill to the broader web testing world. I guess the main piece of context around this is what request for comment you'd call it, that the Angular team put out quite recently, which I'm going to put this in our chat, about upcoming plans. That they're announcing the upcoming plan to at some point deprecate Protractor, and they're kind of sharing their thoughts of what people might do, and they're looking for community comment. So I know, Paul, you've been all over the tools in this. Do you want to give the intro of where things have been for the last few years?
Sure. So like the de facto standard has been that Protractor is just kind of what arrives in the box when you use Angular and you use the Angular CLI. And that was a huge step forward from the kind of the native Java Selenium WebDriver wrapped kind of world that you previously had to live in when trying to automate and drive your web browser. Protractor added a layer of abstraction on top of that let you interact with the browser in a way that was just more akin to how developers think about web applications. So prior to that, the use of Selenium required you to interact with it more from the perspective of someone who actually understood the technologies of the inner workings of the browser-based tools, as opposed to the app development tools of the web space. So Protractor kind of shifted that domain, made it much more easier for developers to get involved in that E2E test authoring. It also had, back in the Angular JS days, it had the ability to understand more about Angular's lifecycle, and would make it more convenient to write testing statements that understood the asynchronous lifecycle of an Angular app. So it simplified some of your test case. And then that continued on into Angular 2+ to where we are today. Then I don't remember when, but it's been a few years now. Cypress arrived on the scene actually arrived, I think, primarily from kind of the React community, and it just took the E2E browser automation world by storm, and has become just the de facto standard for everyone not using Angular CLI who's doing web E2E testing. It uses the same kind of language constructs that Protractor uses. This like Jasmine, Jest, the kind of BDD syntax style that you're used to, but it has a completely different model of how it views the world and how it views browser interactions under the hood. Meanwhile, back in the AngularJS world, they've continued on with Protractor, which makes sense. It's built by and maintained by the same folks at the same company, tested together to work. However, then we have NX in the mix, where NX has become the official third-party solution for enterprise-scaled Angular, and they have automatically, with their tooling, swapped out the use of Protractor for Cypress. So if you're using NX, Cypress is what you get by default today. And so that kind of catches you up on the timeline and history of these tools in just about a minute or so. But that brings us to the issue that Kyle linked in the chat.
Yeah, and I would say there's a broader history also that's outside the Angular-centric space. So, for example, what is it? Cucumber has been out there forever as a different wrapper of Selenium that was in popular wide use like before Angular was even born. So Selenium has been around a while. I think you can totally see Protractor. The reason Protractor and Cypress test code look pretty similar is they're both, obviously directly either using or inspired by Selenium. I mean, Selenium is really kind of the parent of almost all this in some ways. Although if in that request for comment that we linked, they point out really the main axis actually is whether you're using Selenium or whether you're using the browser DevTools interface. And like that's the main chasm, and that the DevTools interface allows some greater convenience, which we certainly benefit from with the developer experience in Cypress, right? But at the same time, the Selenium approach, the kind of outside control approach, spans browsers a lot more. It has, that's still kind of a sticking point. In a sense, since Selenium is a very general purpose tool, that makes Protractor a pretty general purpose tool, and there are certainly use cases you can quite easily do with Protractor. I saw somebody commenting in that, because Paul, you and I have done this. You can bring up two of them at once, and you can tell them to do things and watch what happens in the other. So you can do sort of collaborative testing, and it's slightly inconvenient, but really not much so with anything Selenium based, and you currently can't do that at all with Cypress. So I think a poorly understood point of comparison, at least among users that I've talked to about this, is that these tools are really not direct competitors. They generally address the E2E, but they each have a different subset of features, and they have different trade-offs, and depending on your use case, you might or might not be able to just move over and still do everything you were doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
So let's kind of talk about, obviously we never name customer names on here, right? So customers, be careful. We're always careful. I know that we have used both of those at some considerable scale on our real customer work. What do we have to share kind of based on the experience of having been around the block in the trenches, both ourselves and partnering with our customer developers on this stuff?
Well, I've used both on different projects at different times, and I can say that Protractor worked really well when it worked, and I kind of have a memory of it being slightly faster to start than Cypress, but I don't know if maybe that depends on the total number of tests or something like that. Had a big issue with Protractor one time upgrading packages, and it seems like you have to get versions really closely matched for the different pieces.
Absolutely.
To come as one coherent library, for example, the router does.
Yeah, you need, I can answer that one. So you need so a certain version of Protractor works with a certain version of WebDriver, and that version of WebDriver only works with a certain version of Chrome or Chromium behind the scenes. And essentially, every time anything changes, you got to run and go get the exact command to get the versions back the way you want them. And Cypress avoids that, doesn't it?
To my knowledge, yeah, I've never experienced that with Cypress.
It ships its own browser environment, right?
It ships an Electron environment that you can run it right in the app. It also interfaces with other browsers like Chrome and Firefox. So I've run with all of those, and it works just fine. I assume that it just uses whatever version of Chrome you have. I've not run into a version issue with Chrome like I have with Protractor. Um, the Protractor actually had to downgrade Chrome once because
Sure.
the latest, yeah. But yeah, the Electron, like running it inside Cypress is nice. And then you have the option, obviously, to run it in a different browser. There's a lot of configuration settings you can choose too, which helps. I don't know if that's a very large difference with Protractor, but things like my favorite thing to turn off actually is the watch mode, because it has a feature where if you make a code edit, it immediately starts over running all of your tests again. So I turn that off so that, only when I want to check E2E again, I'll run it. Things like that. Though it has like a UI, there's actually a Cypress app, so that's
Yeah.
Looks like we lost Drew there.
Okay, we'll have to. Okay, so Drew will be back after he deals with a tech. It's like now a word for our sponsors. Wait, we don't have any. Okay. Well, I will pick up where Drew left off. He was talking about the kind of configurability. So, Paul, you and I have been, quite deeply into very thorough, every single feature Protractor testing of a non-trivial app that had timing issues and that sort of thing. And there was a lot of fiddling, but my recollection is that fiddling ultimately was us getting a more complete understanding of both the tool and the web platform and what was really happening, and that it was a worthwhile fiddling. It was a lot of fiddling, but we came out with a deep understanding, and I think that understanding actually is beneficial no matter what tool we use in the future. That's my recollection of the experience.
Yeah, one of the things I've taken from the experience of moving so thoroughly, very thorough Protractor to very thorough Cypress work, is that perception is really everything. In terms of feature capabilities, what you can do, and the benefits and the payoff of using these tools exhaustively, they're very, very similar. At the end of the day, what you get out of them for what you put into them is actually not that far apart at all. But it is the developer experience that Cypress has brought to the table that has gone from everyone I talk to and consult and advise to do E2E testing was avoiding it to they're now excited and eager to embrace it.
Yeah, I think I think Cypress is a great example of how sometimes the user experience, in this case the developer experience, because the user is a developer, is or can be more important than really whatever the other factors are, right? So there are limitations in the Cypress approach, and they seem to maybe not matter compared to if people are willing to do E2E with Cypress, but they weren't with Protractor or with another Selenium-based solution. I think that can sometimes matter more.
Yeah, and I found that I want to start with the positive aspects of Protractor, and that when it comes down to it, once you've developed a sufficient understanding of how Protractor and at times Selenium is actually operating behind the scenes, and understand the gotchas of using any kind of tool to do an asynchronous based style of testing an application. A lot of folks will complain that along the way they'll complain that, oh, my tests are flaky, these tests are unreliable, or Protractor is always failing. And I found that even with Protractor, once you understand the nature of the app of asynchronous platforms like the web, you're really, it's your app that is flaky, and it is the nature of the app interacting with real world latency to third-party systems or APIs that is exposing inconsistencies and indeterminate behavior in your system.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, I know you and I saw this very sharply, right? That when you go to try to get robust Protractor tests for every feature, doing complex asynchronous server interactions, you realize that a human tester is using all kinds of just contextual knowledge of, well, you just wait till it's done. And in a system that has highly variable latency, that's actually terrible. It is terrible that the only way to use the system is to have contextual knowledge of, well, we just kind of wait. We kind of know how long to wait until it's done. Because that means if something is going wrong, you probably don't really know. And I think we found that we would modify the implementation, the design of the system so that it's more correctly communicating the interimness of the state to the human. And then if we're communicating that interimness to the human correctly, it's then quite easy to make your end-to-end test, regardless of tool, also check and watch that interim state.
Yeah, it really surfaces the need to have a good human-friendly version of the idea of observability in your application. Observability in the, not in the RxJS sense, but in the what has the user done when. We actually need the opposite side of that when we enter the world of E2E testing of what is the app doing when and why for how long and when is it complete, exposed to the user, because it's good for the user, but it also makes it possible to properly E2E test.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I know that the current I know that Cypress has a most of its commands have a built-in feature to somehow wait for an element to appear and kind of
it just keeps waiting to see it until your condition becomes true. Yeah,
but I don't think that Protractor did, but it's been a while since I used.
You absolutely can use Protractor in that way. And what Paul and I found, really trying to maximally hone our Protractor use, is that you really shouldn't do that very often. Mm-hmm. And here's an example. You have some screen. Simplest screen. It's an empty screen. There's a button. The user clicks the button, some data is fetched, and then a list appears. That's it. That screen, right? You're saying that's way too simple. None of my real apps ever has a screen that simple. Well, even screens like that, I believe that most screens like that we see in real world live production enterprise apps have a critical design flaw or design bug in that the visual state of the system is loading data and we don't know if it's done yet is the same as the visual state of the system loaded data and there were 0 rows of data.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And that having something like Cypress helping you, or using Protractor in the mode where you just wait to see if the desired number of rows of data eventually appear, I think is actually not good. That's like papering over a design flaw. To fix a design flaw, you need to have a distinct visual state, which is the application is loading data and we don't yet know what will be returned. And your tests can quite easily say, we perform the operation, we verify that we see the indication that work is happening, and then we verify we see the desired end state.
Yeah, I've encountered that too in a project for a client. Luckily, Cypress has the built-in way to wait for network requests as well. So I've, the case where you want to make sure that you're looking at the list of data that came back on the screen instead of some interim state.
So Protractor has that also.
Okay.
But my argument is that using those, those really should mostly not be used. Because that means that to test the application correctly, to know if the application is working right, you have to peek behind the scenes of the app around the back and see what's happening back there. Whereas I kind of feel like, Paul used the word observability. I think that's a great word. A really maximum quality application should have observability in the sense that you should be able to tell, looking at the app as a user, that it's doing the right thing and what state it's in without having to peek around the back and see if your network light is still flashing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Well, and that's a really great point. But I want to go back to something that Drew was talking about with the actual mechanics of the timeouts,
Yeah.
and like how worlds apart those mechanics are in the two different frameworks.
Yeah.
You know, with Protractor, well, let me back up before I go into the differences in those mechanics. Let me first go back to the failings that we see most developers making with mechanics in both of those platforms. In both of those platforms, when we go into consult, what we'll often see is a developer will say, I've pressed the button. Now I would like to wait for 5 seconds before checking to see if the list meets this criteria in this theoretical app that Kyle described.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this because without that wait in there, they will have this framework press the button, and then that API request will be made behind the scenes. Then they'll check for the presence of the list, see that that list isn't populated yet, and fail their test.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they get lucky and maybe something is cached a little closer to them on the network. They press the button, the network request comes out and back, and it refreshes on the browser before they grab the list to check for its presence. And in that case, the test passed. Same test, same app, like a difference in the matter of air temperature.
Right.
What causes their app or their test to succeed or fail. And in these cases, people start to develop defensively against these scenarios by saying, oh, well, we know it should finish within 5 seconds. Well, let's put this thing to sleep for 5 seconds and then come back and check it again.
Yeah.
And it works beautifully. They get the results.
Except it takes forever.
Very, very consistently. But the problem is by the time you've tested or visited the fifth screen on this, you've peppered in probably a dozen 5-second sleeps, and you've added a minute to your runtime of your test.
Yeah, it's
and you keep
really
going,
devastating.
And you keep going, and you keep going.
Yeah,
and
it's devastating to your CI cycle, right?
So fast, yeah.
Yeah.
So that weird scenario right there, that little scenario, happens all the time. We see everyone do it, and we have to retrain folks that no, there are mechanisms built into both of these tools that we can be using instead.
I think the biggest, most stark difference in the developer experience with these two tools is that Protractor, the default you get with the obvious concise syntax is to check right now. In Cypress, the default you get is for it to wait a minute and see, and be willing to keep looking and see if your thing becomes true. So that if you don't deal with everything I just described that you really ought to deal with, but practically speaking, many apps don't deal with. If you don't deal with them and you just walk the happy path with Cypress, you get a tremendously more pleasant experience. Whereas you really have to be quite rigorous to get that happy experience with Protractor.
Yeah, with Protractor, and every single one of our Protractor apps that we created, we would put the same utility script in that would be something to the effect of retry for up to, and then you pass in how long you'd like it to keep attempting to retry, and it would essentially it would patch this same idea that Cypress does by default. And so we would just add that, and then all of our tests would then function the same way.
I think that actually appeared in a somewhat more, one of the more recent major versions of Protractor, and then I think we've done a syntactic wrapper to make that super concise to use more than once now.
Right.
So obviously, we've been around the block with these enough to have a lot of points of comparison. But kind of moving on to the kind of the bigger question that is brought up by this deprecation, right? So they're talking about deprecating in a couple of years, and they're getting public comment on that, and I have no idea what they'll eventually decide. But in that uncertainty, let's say we someone watching this has a substantial investment, a pretty big test suite that they're protractoring right now, and they're using it they're doing their important tests of a mission critical application. What should they be thinking at? How should they be getting ready for this world where Protractor at some to be decided date becomes deprecated? Should they be moving to some different, more Protractor-like tool, or should you think they should maybe try to take the leap all the way to Cypress and then deal with other browsers separately, or?
I think they should go to Cypress. I think, yeah, they have helpful documentation about coming from Protractor, and they're both doing the same thing in the sense that they're asynchronously exercising your app. So I don't think it's too bad to move from Protractor to Cypress, although I haven't had to do that, luckily, on a large existing project. So I'd be interested to hear if any of that's not true. But a lot of the code looks the same, looks very similar between.
It's true or not depending on what features you're using. So the last time I looked, for example, the ability to do a file upload existed in Selenium and therefore Protractor, but did not yet exist with Cypress. And so you'd have to modify your test cases or modify your app to not test that path if your tool can't test it. Now, if that's one little thing you do, you might decide not to do it and you're fine.
Interestingly enough, that exact example of file upload, I had someone who wanted to know how much I'd used Cypress. And I said, I've made a file upload work in Cypress as a metric for how well I know Cypress.
Nice. Very nice. Also, the last I looked, and I know that they've been working on this, the browser support was quite narrow. Is there a way to run Cypress on anything other than Chromium? Didn't you say that it can remote control Firefox now? Is that true?
It can, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we have at least two major browsers spanned.
Yeah, I didn't have to set anything up for the current version that we're on, at least. So I noticed that there's an option, and I chose it once, and I can't remember if I actually ran it, but I was like, oh, there's Firefox in here. So I would expect that it works pretty well, just because I didn't have to set anything up to make it appear. Now, if you use the Electron choice versus Chrome, it's really similar because Electron is Chromium based, but there are differences.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I mean, there is still an issue out there that on the Cypress's GitHub, for keeping it in consideration that it will work with IE 11. So, hope is not dead that they will never do that. They've left it open and is marked as under consideration.
I have seen a lot.
Not prioritized, but
yeah, I've seen a lot, even over the last month, of various platforms, tools, or so-and-so saying, now is the time, we're done with IE 11. So
well,
I feel like
defer long enough.
That's what I'm thinking. If Cypress can just defer it, they may be just about to the point that enough other people have decided to just walk away from IE 11 that Cypress can also. Yeah. So I get the impression that all three of us are in agreement that kind of your default path, if you're not doing anything where Cypress is a problem, your default path, your first swing, your first attempt should be move over there. That's where the community is. That's very broadly used, very popular, good developer experience, right?
Yeah, you're kind of at risk at staying on Protractor because it's getting less and less attention. So I would definitely suggest, if it's possible, to start switching.
So I've done a little bit with a couple of the alternatives with Puppeteer, which is pretty slick, which is like kind of another way of remote controlling a browser. And I've done a little bit with the WebDriver API directly, which initially sounds like, oh no, but then it's like, wait, actually a lot of what we do with Protractor, you can pretty much just do with the WebDriver API. So if Protractor really does reach the deprecation, then I would say the choice is not, do I stay with Protractor or do I go to Cypress? It's, do I go to Cypress or do I go to one of these other more niche Selenium solutions, right?
That could be. You have those available to you. I've used Puppeteer not with a testing library, just to play with, and try to click through, an application and pull some data as if I were a user. And that worked pretty well. I can't speak to how well it works as a testing library, though.
We have such a thing in production, by the way, here. And I say production because I think it's a pretty narrow case for just one customer. But we have a customer in our family of custom companies that needed some data, and there was just no way to get the data from an API. And an enterprising developer here managed to set up Puppeteer to pop up, log in, get the data up, and grab that data and get it where the customer needed it.
Nice.
And it works fine. It's quite good, actually. It's quite good.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also Chrome only or Chromium only. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, while I think Cypress is like the obvious next choice, like you were just describing, I would add that there's probably room to start researching and exploring low-code, no-code testing platforms. Since we're already seeing a rise in a new wave of no-code, low-code solutions for app development, I think E2E testing is an area where it might be particularly well-primed, where no-code, low-code like tools can really thrive in this space. I don't have any recommendations. I have like some platforms I'm aware of, but no recommendations in that space, unfortunately.
There have been tools in that space for a couple decades now. I've actually been on projects long ago that were using those kind of off to the side where we weren't really even touching them as the dev team. My impression is those tools are great for getting you from 0 to a certain point, and then you hit a point where you really need to be writing a program. So, but that's my programmer bias showing, right?
Well, I am all for like a blend of solutions. Like because of where I am in this space, like I have no problem using 3 different tools to achieve a job, for the purpose of kind of optimizing each of those tools to their purposes. So like I would absolutely advocate for going out, picking up a low-code, no-code solution to test 80% of your use cases, then add Cypress to get the ones that you really do have to code up a solution for, and then tack on just the tiniest little, Protractor or native
Selenium
or Selenium-based solution for that 1% edge case where in IE something acts a little finicky and we really need to get that particular use case covered in IE. But I live in this world of deeply understanding the tools. Like my domain of web expertise is tools.
Yeah.
So, would I recommend that solution to a client? Depends on the client.
So,
Drew, I saw you nodding about something about the low-code, no-code testing.
Yeah, I strongly agree with everything you just said, Paul, because just to me, like the writing code to do end-to-end testing, that's fine and it works, but it can be a lot of overhead to do really simple things. And it kind of, after a while, it's like, whoa, we're actually building another application. So, yeah, if there's a way to do like you said, 80% of the application with a low code or no code solution, and then like the rest of it be code, that would be a huge improvement to me over the current default. Well, I say current default because it seems to be the community, or the entire community is right now of testing your whole app with Cypress. Again, it works really well, but you do feel like you're building another app.
Yeah, so much so that like we actually have a Cypress course where we spend 2 days teaching you not only like how to achieve the testing purposes, but the majority of that time is spent teaching you how to write your Cypress tests in such a way that they remain maintainable, scalable, that the code that you're writing itself is also going to integrate well with the platform that you're testing it against in such a way that you can actually get deterministic results, and all of these conflation of development ideas as they manifest in this world of testing, because you're simply using a platform that requires you to code as to one that doesn't.
So as long as we're plugging things, we also have a Protractor class, and we spent quite a lot of effort like getting the level of mastery where we felt comfortable offering it. And in fact, we got to the point Paul, this might not be 100% true. I think it's like 90% true, where we automatically test our code examples that we use in our Angular class. We auto test those with both Protractor and Cypress, because that keeps us in sync and fresh on how all these things fit together in, like, 50 common types of screens somebody might. We certainly won't announce giving up until the team officially deprecates it. But I guess at some point in the future, when Protractor is formally deprecated, we probably won't offer that anymore, either.
Yeah, in that same request for comment, it also talks about the state of AngularJS as well, and how that relates to this actually, because it's kind of the official testing tool for AngularJS, and how even that hasn't dropped support yet and won't until December of this year.
So, speaking of that, I don't feel great about a tool or your tests caring what you wrote the application in. I feel like there's a Platonic ideal out there of how end-to-end testing works, where the end-to-end testing is not allowed to know or care or have any dependency on the underlying tool. And you might, for example, write an app in React and have some end-to-end tests around it, and then decide to swap React out for Svelte next year, and your end-to-end tests should probably still work. Unless you, like, if you were just doing a straight rewrite where you didn't change the user experience, it's not clear to me why we should allow these tools to have interdependencies. But what do you guys think about that? Should your end-to-end tests be neutral as to your implementation framework, or is it really so tightly bound that's like not a reasonable goal?
Well, other than Protractor being an Angular tool, like the Cypress test that I've worked on projects, I don't think that they really have a dependency on the Angular app usually. I think sometimes there's like a shim that someone put in, or you need to get something from the app. In that case, maybe we did bring something in from the Angular app directly. But yeah, Cypress isn't part of a web framework like Protractor is, so I feel like that's a step in that direction at least.
But I guess that not just in the tool, but in terms of how we use the tool. Like, would you put an Angular component name in a selector in your Cypress test? I think that we started down the path with Protractor of like referring to Angularisms all over, and then over time we're like, wait, no, that's kind of like a layering violation. And most of the time, ideally, in your end-to-end test, you should be looking at things the way a user would look at them. A user sees that the right words are on the screen. The user doesn't know or care about invisible things in the DOM.
Yeah, technically that is just up to how you write the test, because at least with Cypress, you can write whatever spec files you want. So you can write a spec file for each component and name it that way, but the tool doesn't actually necessarily enforce that. But I see what you're saying, because I think that is kind of the default thing to do when you're end-to-end testing is to kind of test the pieces that you've just built and to name the test that way. One thing that you can do with tools like Cypress, and I'm assuming Protractor was, it was the same. You can use selectors that aren't specific to your components. You could be using CSS selectors, but yeah, that's kind of like it, and not in the direction that you're talking about, I think, because you want to be more descriptive of like, hey, click the OK button, rather than click some component OK button.
Yeah. I'm really torn by that question, because on one hand, I think you're absolutely right. In order to achieve this like idealized next step of our tools are more compatible, more generically available to kind of span these tiers, and work well with having a single environment like that Azure DevOps environment that can easily run and deal with front end and back end things all as one cohesive unit. Like, we're going to need our tools to be more and more agnostic of kind of how those internal implementations are built. But at the same time, ideas like, like drag and drop or file upload, if we can create more framework, if we can tool our app using the framework to support our E2E tests in that goal, then it becomes a lot easier to do more challenging things. And I'll throw another wrench into the works, and that is when you start talking about internationalization.
Yeah.
Like, you can't necessarily write your end-to-end test to even target a target language. Furthermore, if you need to be able to test aspects that involve the English words on the page, you need to tie your testing framework into the rest of your build tool chain to even achieve that.
So let me throw this idea out, Paul. So you're saying that to really do a worthy full end-to-end test of an internationalized application, you probably ought to run your tests in at least 2 of your end languages. That way you're testing that you are in fact swapping out, right? That I log in as a German person and I see a German word for login.
I think that there should be at least a simple smoke test equivalent E2E test for that use case. But in that scenario, I would try as hard as I can to write my tests agnostic of the language, but still find a way to make sure that also meets the validation requirements that might be set by part of the organization upstream of me.
Wave goodbye to our guest Glenn, who wrote a few comments and said that
Thanks,
to move on. Thanks for coming.
And I'll throw another wrench into the works.
Well, somebody has come unmuted on there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to stick this up before we got too far. Drew had pointed this to me, and I just brought it up on the screen share. So this is the result of a survey the Angular team ran on what tools people are using, and it matches our experience. Like if you would have asked this question a few years ago, the big pie would have been Protractor, and Cypress has really taken over to a very substantial extent and become by far the dominant one, with Protractor there but probably shrinking, and then everything else is just a scattering of tools whose adoption was probably driven by that tool was already in use for other projects wherever the project is happening.
Yeah, I would add one little thing to that. The Selenium WebDriver, this is just our experience at Oasis, but we've seen that there is a big block of usage on that, surrounded by the fact that it is what the teams at our clients already knew.
Yeah.
Yes, it is what it's what they're already using, but it's also like something what they know.
Yes.
So even though we're building and working in a brand new framework, a brand new full stack environment, like the testing team that is independent of the development team already has skills with this other tool. Even if we have a perfect opportunity from a technical bifurcation within the org to have picked up a brand new tool and start using it, like that inertia of we have a testing team and that testing team is trained in Selenium sometimes wins out here too.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I was just had a browser tab up here. I was taking a look at Playwright. I'm gonna have to take a deeper look at Playwright later. It looks pretty appealing from at least the first initial look.
I would say that graph was missing something really important.
Yeah.
And that was the number of responses that said we're not doing end-to-end testing. I think all of these would have been all of them together would have been a blip compared to the number of people not doing E2E testing at all.
So in my youth of only a few years ago, I might have had negative words to say. It's like this thing we do. We go to our conferences and we sit around the table, and we sort of subtly shame each other for not doing all the practices, right? It's a thing in our industry, but I think it's not necessarily wrong or irrational that some decision makers trying to stretch their budget take a look at like how things are going, writing a bunch of code, especially people that maybe didn't get the async stuff down very well, and they just conclude that it's not going to pay off for them. I think some of those people are right. That even though, like, on a project that I'm leading, I now know enough to make E2E pay off. I think there are many projects where if that team did E2E, they would deliver less than they are, just because there are so many issues that they would have to fight through. I mean, without naming any names, you think maybe half of our customers, large critical projects, have E2E? A little more than that, maybe? It's not 100%.
I would say that percentage has sharply fallen over the years. Like anymore, we get a lot of folks that are now doing E2E. Historically, though, if you kind of add it all up, the summation of it, yeah, 50-50 is probably right on.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly seeing a different mix. We're getting more and more. We're having more and more kind of larger, more important projects come our way. So we're seeing a higher density of E2E, absolutely. But still, just looking over the sweep of it, I've taught classes where I ask, close your eyes and raise your hand a little bit about how much E2E coverage there is of your projects. And I've often got pretty low percentages. A room full of people, and only a third say that their project has significant E2E coverage. I've seen a lot of that.
I got a question for the group here.
Yeah.
We've been talking about like the things that are coming out of the CLI. Should they be putting more things into the CLI as they deprecate them, even if they're not maintained by Angular? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I already mentioned SSR. So they've put SSR in the CLI. That's great. They've put Tailwind in the CLI. That's maybe great. So
should they put something like Cypress and ESLint back in to replace the pieces that have come out?
I think it's gotten confusing because there's NX now too. So, like, what percentage of Angular, projects today are using CLI versus NX? Probably, I guess, the majority are using, like, the vast majority are probably still just using CLI. I think that it is better for things to come in the box because that's kind of Angular's niche, if you will. So I don't think it would be smart to just drop Protractor and not replace it with something.
Or Lint.
Lint, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I agree with you completely, Drew, that I think this is Angular. Like when people come to us and say, help me compare Angular, React, and Vue for this problem I'm having, one of the points where Angular tends to do relatively well is the kind of cohesive tool set, a platform approach rather than a set of libraries approach. And I feel like to compete best, Angular needs to lean into that. So I agree. If Protractor comes out, something else ought to go in. And not having a lint tool in the box, I mean, if I wanted the kind of just complete random set of practices that characterizes, in languages and tools where there's not kind of a standard tool set, I'd probably be using one of those, as a project owner. People come to Angular to get that consistency. So yeah, I think those two slots need to be filled. What do you think, Paul? You asked the question.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I see one alternative is that the CLI. I think there might be a better question that I should have asked. And it may have been like, what is the role of the Angular CLI moving forward? Because at the rate it's going, the only responsibility it'll have left is that it happens to be a wrapper around Webpack and a couple of schematics.
I mean, I mentioned in our kind of before the main topic that the Webpack part, I think, is now becoming a thing holding it back versus the leading edge tools that are jumping to things like Snowpack and Vite. So that's not real compelling. If you say the the main value proposition is a thing that we really ought to be evolving forward from. But I also, Drew, I like what you said. Like for the projects that we work on, like it's an NX world.
Yeah.
And I haven't taken a census recently, but like a year ago, I asked around, and I think all but one of the projects we had running at that time was on NX.
And I can easily see like right now, there's obviously, plenty of friendship between the Angular and the NX team, and the Narwhal team. But I could easily imagine Angular has always leaned towards we really would like the community to be able to pick up and support some of these ideas, and so it could be that NX becomes almost like a front running aspect and area of the community, like that's been kind of unofficially blessed with the leadership of enterprise conglomerate of tooling, that Angular can pare down the tooling and focus on the app framework aspect independent of the tooling. Maybe that is a direction that is opened up here, going down this path of continuing to deprecate and pull things out.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, if the Angular team has a lot of work that they have on their, I guess, the roadmap they published, which is like mostly work in Angular, maybe it does make sense that they just say, yeah, I mean, here's the CLI. It has what you really need, and then here's a community that has like a more complete tool set. I mean, maybe that makes more sense than I thought it did.
Yeah, if you need more of these tools and some more support, like we recommend you check out our community partner.
Yeah, maybe that's where it ends up.
Yeah, as long as the NX community, whatever the community thing ends up being, but it's NX currently, is as long as that has the same quality that the CLI has had in the past, because CLI has been a huge benefit, I think, for Angular from the start. Well, I guess it didn't have it right out of the gate, but since version 2. So, but yeah, NX, as long as it, as long as they keep doing a good job there, then you might be onto something.
So, I was using CLI from its earliest days. Oh, I think you were too. And I would characterize it as it was a hard-won battle. A lot of people, both on the Angular team and paid and unpaid people in the community, put in just a Herculean effort over years to get the stability that we've come to enjoy in Angular CLI. I mean, it did not come easy. They fought for it,
and they put everyone on notice when they got that shipped.
Yeah, it is impressive. So yeah, that's why also got to remember, NX is great, but NX is also like kind of an extension of CLI, which we're doing Angular, isn't it? I mean, that's my impression.
Yeah.
And so this is not an either or. This is a core tool and an extension. It's not a it's not a versus. It's a both. It's a partnership.
The CLI pairs down to the building. Like it is focused on building Angular. That and schematics. If it has those two purposes, I'm focused on building, and I give you a framework for extensibility, and then everything else becomes a community supported extensibility beyond that fact.
Yeah, it's very the energy isn't split somehow between, or I guess I should say that the bar for quality isn't lower for things that are not, the things that are in NX versus things that are in CLI. I'm just thinking about linting because there's still that huge performance issue, and not to bring that topic back up because we kind of started with it, but like in CI, it's like competing with E2E for how long it takes. So you can always, I guess, schedule a separate instance just for your linting, but that hopefully that doesn't, hopefully things like that get fixed and that doesn't become more the way things go going forward.
So I brought a comment here from a viewer. Hello, Nuno. That's a great comment. That was my impression, like kind of more closer to the launch of NX. But I would say, kind of come on in, the water's fine. NX works fine for just making a single app. It's not. I mean, I would say it's not that much less beginner friendly. It's maybe a little less, but it's not that big a deal. I think that once you've used CLI in any even slightly non-trivial way, like once you've made more than one app, you've added your second app in a CLI workspace. At that point, you can probably step right in and use NX instead, and not be significantly hindered anyway. You might choose not to use some of the more power tool, like the run all type stuff. You might never need run all, but if you don't ever need run all or run many, then its existence probably won't be in your way.
I don't know. On the flip side of that, though, the being able to like hop into an Angular class and say, hey, this is the one tool we need. This Angular CLI is all we need to teach you a lot about Angular. For an absolute beginner is a pretty big win.
Except don't we actually use NX in our Angular training?
Yeah, we use NX, but like you just mentioned, we intentionally strip out all those other things. But we use it in a way that is they could take this and do these same things with the CLI, and they don't happen to know it's behind the scenes. But yes,
right.
Teaching them like this is just CLI is an easier way for folks that are absolute beginners in this space.
Yeah. Well, what else do we have here? We've kind of talked about our main topic in some considerable depth here. It seems like we reached a conclusion of like kind of a default people ought to do. We've shouted out our offerings for anybody who sees this and wants our help doing it. We've shared our experiences that sort of span many enterprises. But what else is there to say? Are we sort of at the point of now we sort of wait and see, wait for the rest of the community feedback to roll in and see what the official wind down plan ends up?
Well, I'm kind of curious about the the wind down plan, like that 2022, is that when they said? Or
well, here I'll click the button here. So here's the issue, right? And so that issue, which anybody watching can now click it in the comments. Let me see if I can.
The end of 2022 is.
Yeah, end of 2022. That's where they're targeting, right? So that's pretty far. I mean that's a while. Now, on the other hand, we probably have customer projects where they're so big that fitting in replacing all the E2E code in 2022 is like no way it's going to happen. So I think there's going to be plenty of projects that don't even start their migration until after the official end date. But I kind of think that's okay. I'm sure. I think there's even a link in there that XLTS and then one other company has already said they're going to do some, post-official support to fix any critical bugs and keep it running. So if we get phenomenally unlucky and some key browser or Angular change breaks Protractor 3 days after the end of support, there still will be a path to patch it and keep running. So even though they're initially targeting the end of 2022, realistically it could easily be a couple years after that there's a strong sense of urgency. I mean, Paul, I think we were talking about this on a previous episode that just now, as we're finally approaching the end date for AngularJS, we're starting to see like an uptick in interest of organizations, that have some old, proven, reliable production AngularJS app start to get a sense of urgency of a migration.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah. I guess it's responsible and wise to wait as long as possible, really, because like what's the return on investment of spending part of 2022 revamping your E2E instead of adding more features? Users aren't going to pay for better E2E; they're going to pay for better features.
Yeah.
So
I'd also give a word of advice for anyone who is now concerned about migrating and what that might look like. In my opinion, the kind of most important thing that you can do for the migration of the code base itself is go look up and understand Cypress's idea of app actions and how those work, and then make your Protractor code base look and operate as much like that as you possibly can to ease your eventual migration to Cypress.
Yeah. That reminds me that we found that there's sort of a modern style of Protractor where you turn off the old automated wait thing and you use async await and such more explicitly. And I wondered how broadly that was used. But I think that issue about the deprecation, I believe it said that essentially that's exactly what the Angular team, or that's what is done internally at Google. I think that's what they said, is that they did the investment to revamp their Protractor to use the sort of modern style of Protractor, which is what we have, and all of our examples are all the modern style. And it's basically it's a lot more work to do in your app than to do in Protractor itself.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I don't know. I'm kind of out of steam here. I'm out of ideas, but I don't want to cut it off if either you gentlemen have any more along these lines. Is there anything we want to wish for, in case somebody is out there watching and trying to decide what they're going to go implement and release to the world for free? Like, how do we wish this worked?
I wish there were a lot of machine learning around it so that it would automatically do what I want. I have no idea what that would look like, though.
Do you think that might be coming, where you run the app, you run an app and you just click through it as a user, and you just run through a bunch of different happy paths through the app? And I don't know if it would exactly be machine learning. It might be something that maybe doesn't quite merit that title. But I wonder if there is some path where you just kind of run through the app and then it just picks up on the commonalities and differences between all of your successful runs and is able to do its own successful run. Like I wonder if we'll get to that point where a lot of this might be even more no code than no code, right? It's like, I recorded a video of running through the app, and then this thing just runs through the app the same way because it knows where I clicked and it knows what I saw, and it alerts. It says, "Hey, here's a difference I saw," and I just say, "Yep, that difference is fine. No, that difference is a bug," and it learns. I don't know. Maybe I think that's a great idea, Drew.
The low code no code platform I was thinking of, I'll go ahead and plug it. I have no idea if this is a good platform. I just am aware of its existence. It's Testim, testim.io.
Let me see if this one I've ever heard of.
I know if you know Sonny Youssef from the Angular community, I know he's a big fan of this platform.
Yeah, that's, I'll put in chat just automation. So I can get the URL up.
There you go.
Testim.io.
Testim's automation is an AI powered end-to-end test.
This might be what I was saying should exist, right? Yeah. Although it's not no code, because I'm looking at it and right on their screen there is like someone writing code with a series of awaits inside an async inside a test case.
Well,
so yeah. It's definitely not no code. It just remembers us how big this world is. So we have this set of tools that are really quite similar that work pretty well with these web apps and so on. And there's like a whole other set of tools that do the same thing but for native apps. we've worked on native apps in the past, and those native apps sometimes had some degree of automated testing. There were tools that would control, just like grab a Windows window and find the text and click the button, right? Like the tools existed then. And then like there are tools that do this for mobile that bring up a simulated mobile device and then click buttons on it on a native mobile app. No web involved at all. Then even further, so we had this interesting conversation with a customer long ago at our sister company, Expium, where we're Jira experts, Atlassian experts at that company. And they were they were asking us to help evaluate some add-on tools for Jira. And one of them was like a testing tool for Jira. And it took us a while to realize that in the context of that company, which appeared to be quite a successful company selling a lot of units, the testing tool was just a tool to record, like for a user, a human tester, to go record that I successfully clicked through all these steps of written test case A43 on build 17. So like what they characterize as a testing tool was not a tool that executed automated tests. It was a tool for users keeping track of human operated tests, which is to say there are a lot of operations out there still with human testers because automated testing is quite challenging. And because there's certain kinds of things you can only really test with sort of, an adversarial human tester. But yeah, it's such a big world. Paul, you look puzzled.
Yeah, I think a lot of large companies still kind of are set up to have QA done by humans. And I think that kind of competes with E2E a bit, or automated E2E.
Definitely. I've actually been in meetings about that at companies some years ago, in which I got to be the one to reassure the human QA department, don't worry, there's still a lot for you to do. Selenium, none of these tools replaces the need for a human that also has like a more holistic and adversarial relationship with the software, where they're like looking at the thing, using their like deeply honed understanding of ways in which it could break to think of ways to break it, to like go actively try to find bugs or to show they couldn't find one by looking hard. And that's very different, where it's like sort of a struggle to get your automated tests to run the exact same path repeatedly. It's a very different world. A tester who like intentionally does things a little different, just trying to jiggle the software and try to get it to break. Okay, well, I guess it seems like we're about out of steam here, so I don't know. Any last words before we wrap? Great. Well, I guess we'll see some of our audience has made it to the end, so thank you, those that held on, and those that watched the recording. Thank you for watching also, and I guess we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.